stress is great. Stress is wonderful. I love stress, stress, stress. Love it, and love it. And that sounds crazy. That sounds so absolutely crazy because we are so conditioned to think that stress is bad for us. And truth be told, it can be. It 100% can be. At the root of most chronic health issues, you do see stress being the primary cause because it results in all of this internal inflammation. However, here's what's interesting. There was a study done by the NIH, and what they showed was the perception of stress is what determines what it does inside the body. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what they showed is people who tended to perceive stress as a negative thing were more likely to have a premature death. People who experienced high levels of stress and who also thought that stress would have these adverse effects were 43%. 43%. There was a 43% higher chance of them having a premature death. My favorite part of this study is the fact that the people who had high levels of stress but did not think that the stress itself was a negative actually fared better than not only those groups that I just mentioned, they fared better than people who didn't experience as much stress. So just for a moment, wrap your mind around that. The fact that these individuals who experienced higher levels of stress but did not have a negative relationship to that stress, did not perceive it as a negative thing, actually fared far better than the people who had lower levels of stress. All right, well, that's interesting now, because now we got something interesting to play with, right? Because here, all we have to truly do is shift our relationship to stress, right? So when we're experiencing stress, and stress is going to show up either way, right? This is why we engage in different practices and we use different techniques to regulate our nervous system so that way we are adaptable, so we are resilient, so we are flexible when those things arise. And so we know how to regulate ourselves so that way we are then able to better respond to that. But how about just also simply shifting our perception of stress itself? Because what they showed is people who viewed stress as positive, their blood vessels did not constrict as much as those who perceived it as negative. Now, of course, all right, let's paint a picture. Lion is chasing you. What happens? Heart rate increases, blood is being distributed, oxygen is being delivered to all your muscles, to the brain, so that way what? You can get away. You can survive, right? Oxygen is also delivered to the blood so you can think more clearly, right? What you also see is actually, and what's interesting is an increase in cortisol and adrenaline actually improves alertness, right? And your focus. Because in that moment, you have to be on point if you're going to survive. Now, if that lion is chasing you, you need to get away and you need to survive. Stress and that stress response is necessary. All right. In our modern day world today, we don't have lions chasing us. However, we do still experience states of stress. Now, in those moments, is that stress response necessarily serving us? Not always. Sometimes it may be. But what we can do is we can actually, by changing our relationship to that stress response, we can create a very different response internally where we're not creating as much inflammation. We're not damaging the organs. We're not constricting the blood vessels as much. In fact, those blood vessels remain nice and dilated in the same way as if we were in a positive state, feeling happy and joyful and grateful and all those great things, right? So the perception of stress actually determines how our bodies, fare in the long run. So by simply shifting your relationship to your stress, and this is why, for example, things like tumor breath work, Wim Hof breath work, right, where you're entering with intention into a state of heightened stress, for example, also going and just working out, right? Because we have this perceived sense that if I enter this situation, I know that there are positive benefits to it, it changes what happens in the body. The body responds very differently than if we were suddenly, pounced on by a lion or something like that. So it's a very different response. And again, so here, the intention, the awareness is what is so key. And so by simply knowing that stress can be a positive, instead of suddenly us being, riddled with all this information, all this, just heightened fight or flight, what happens instead is our focus goes up, our alertness goes up. The body actually produces oxytocin. Why oxytocin? Well, because then oxytocin, being a bonding molecule, encourages us to go socialize, to reach out for help, right? And oxytocin is also just awesome because it's anti-inflammatory, which is really cool, right? So now you can actually lower inflammation. And this is what's so cool about something like Wim Hof breathing, because it's been shown to actually lower states of inflammation, because there is this temporary elevation in some of these different neurochemicals and just the chemistry of the body. What it does is it actually dampens inflammation. It improves your immune response. It elevates it. So that's, it's breath work alone. Let's say you go and take a cold shower and you know the health benefits of taking a cold shower. You're going in there and your body is screaming out, get out. I'm stressed out. But it's creating a very positive effect inside the body because it's all about the perception of it, right? Simply shifting your perception of stress will change what happens inside the body. Now, I'm also going to encourage you further, whenever you're dealing with stressful situations, start to engage them as challenges. In fact, they've done many studies with students and in business where when there are situations presented to them, instead of responding like, oh my God, like this is stressful, this is bad, like, oh great, a challenge, immediately the brain starts to operate differently. We actually have more use of those cognitive faculties that allow us to be more creative, to see the situation more holistically, and to be able to approach it with greater resources in the brain, versus if all the blood is just shunted to the limbic system because we're in this state of fight or flight, right? So again, it's the perception of it. And so by simply shifting our perception, we are able to be far more productive, far more creative, far more effective. So I'm going to encourage you guys as we move into this month of May, right? May being all about mental health, which I'm all about, right? Let's start to play with this idea of stress being a positive, right? Stress being a positive, and any single time that you notice stress coming up, learning how to be present for that, learning how to be mindful, right? And this is why mindfulness is so effective. And I'll give you 2 reasons actually. Because being mindful, being aware, being present for the experience, you can observe the thoughts, you can observe the emotions, and then you can choose intentionally how you're going to react and respond, versus simply diving into impulse, right? And allowing the situation to take control of you. You are now in control of the situation. Secondly, mindfulness practices actually create slower brainwaves. So when you are in a state of fight or flight, when you're anxious and extra stressed, you have more levels of high beta, right? Fast brainwaves. By engaging in mindfulness practices, the brain is producing slower brainwaves, which calms the brain down. So we're going to talk a lot more about mindfulness. We're going to talk a lot more about stress. We're going to talk a lot more about regulating the nervous system and all those great different things. But for today, I just want you to start to think about, how can I approach stress a little differently? How can I just take these situations and start to know that by simply shifting my awareness around them and my relationship to them, I can actually engage them very differently. So I'm going to leave you guys with that, wishing you a beautiful, beautiful rest of your day, rest of your week, and sending you much, 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 much love. Take care.